Hello. I'm Safi, or Sophia Carmi-Jones. You can call me Safi. I am a assistant director at the UW Women's Center, and for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting and talking to yet, I'm the person who's putting just like an inordinate amount of creamer in my coffee right over there. So if we run out of creamer cups, I am truly sorry. And as I was sitting here listening to Velma and Maria's conversation, I was just kind of struck by how amazing it is that we have multiple generations of a movement in this room, and how rare that is, and how important it is to have events like this, so that it's just so cool. There are like multi-generations of people working for the same cause, and it's so rare that you get all those people in one room. So, love being part of it, and on top of getting to be part of this conference and getting to meet and talk and learn from all of our presenters and all of you, I also have the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Nani Cuadrado, who is the Director of Education for Health, Education, Advocacy, and Linkage, HEAL, Trafficking. She will be delivering our first keynote address, The Climate is Changing, and so is Human Trafficking. HEAL Trafficking is an integrated network of over 4,000 survivors and multidisciplinary professionals in 50 countries dedicated to ending human trafficking and supporting its survivors from a health perspective. And our own director, Dr. Basu, is included in this network as a board member of HEAL. HEAL is a leader in innovative health solutions to eradicating all forms of human trafficking worldwide. And as Director of Education for HEAL, Nani is a healthcare expert whose extensive body of work addresses the connections between houselessness, forced migration, and human trafficking through providing comprehensive care for populations vulnerable to all three. For more on her many contributions to both the healthcare field and anti-trafficking movement, please see the full bio provided in your conference programs. I know I speak for all of us at the Women's Center when I say we're delighted that Director Cuadrado was able to be here today and to represent HEAL and provide vital insights into the changing landscape of human trafficking. And with that, please join me in welcoming to the stage Director of Education for HEAL Trafficking, Nani Cuadrado.
It's actually so humbling to be here and to actually, like Safi said, just look at the generations of anti-trafficking movement sitting right here. I'd like to actually spend the whole afternoon just picking everyone's brain because I'm hearing lots of expertise, and so I'm hoping that this particular topic is actually a topic that could be somebody's PhD, and so I'm not doing it any justice, I think, by just speaking for an hour, but I do appreciate the opportunity to kind of shed a little bit of light about climate change and trafficking, as well as sharing the good work that Washington is already doing, and hopefully spark a little bit of interest in you to make some changes in your sphere of influence. As Honorable Velma has said, that was her influence. She took what she could do and actually brought that to the table to get some legislation passed. But what is our own sphere of influence? Let's dive into it. So I actually probably didn't do this because I was already introduced. So HEAL is an acronym that about 10 years ago we started working. Our co-founder in the funny little hat is actually a Harvard-trained emergency physician, but we try to make, what she started to realize is that we are missing it as healthcare providers and didn't know what to do about that. So she connected with Sutapa and many others in here to create HEAL. And so that's me doing some work in India. We're working with de-notified tribes and their community health workers. And there's just some really fabulous things going on, but I'm hoping to incite you to think about what your sphere should be. So I think we've kind of shared a little bit about what HEAL is doing, and I think the reason I want to show this to you is we have buckets. And even if you're not a healthcare provider, there is somewhere, some bucket here that would allow you to affect a change. So whether it's empowering healthcare professionals with tools and helping to educate them, whether it's providing training programs to help identify and support survivors, whether it's advocating, like our Honorable, I want to say Honorable Gloria has shared, or whether it's linkage or leadership. What is it that you can do to affect a change? So I think this is the statistic that really inspires me as a trained physician assistant to do this work. 68% of folks that we've cared for in healthcare were being cared for by a provider while they're being trafficked, and the provider did not know. And I can be included in that. So for 20 years as a PA, as a physician assistant in the emergency department, when I saw this study, it actually was like, it made me sick, because I thought about all the people that I missed, and all the people, just because I didn't know. And so what I wanted to encourage us is whatever your touch point is to healthcare, whether you're in it as a social worker, physician, nurse, some kind of support person, mental health provider, we have a supreme opportunity and a great opportunity to affect a change in this realm. I always thought of human trafficking as a law enforcement issue. I think most of us have. We see movies like Taken and think this is the response, and that was law enforcement. But if you think about it, our gift is that survivors are coming to us as a trusted member for support. And so if we don't recognize it, which we haven't, then we're losing that opportunity. So I want to encourage you to think about this stat as one that might be able to influence a change. So there's two different responses, and generally I'm going to start with the after. So after something happens, after someone is trafficked, oftentimes the response is just that. So they're providing, we've got some great partners in the back. They provide emergency care, they provide long-term housing, they provide counseling. And so this is often where response to anti-trafficking efforts has sat. However, I think where we can affect the most change, and this is where I want to tweak you a little bit, is what about prevention and stopping it before it actually happens? And so what about promoting healthy relationships, about reducing some of those risks, adding some protective factors, and thinking about human trafficking in that realm, which is what Sutapa has already been doing. So this is public health. And so I'm not sure how many of you are from Seattle, but when I was doing a bit of research, there was a little vigilante that used to be roaming the streets of Seattle wearing this costume, and he would try to intervene with different drug people that were being bullied, and he would go through the streets from about 2011 to 2014, and the police were going crazy with him because he was jumping up and down, he was chasing all over, and so this is the GQ article they did on him. And so this is what we're not. This is not the public health. Going in, wearing a costume, trying to figure out how do we save or rescue someone. People don't need rescue. They've been surviving out there for years. Our classroom is the survivors that we're caring for. So look at that as a gift. So this is what we're not. So this is how I think of public health, and I'm sure all the public health persons in here are going to, but University of Washington has one of the best public health programs in the country. And so I want you to think about public health as a toddler. And so generally, if I'm a physician assistant in the ER, then I take care of you coming to the emergency department for a rash or for a contusion or bruise. I'm only treating you as a person sitting right in front of me. So that's my response. If you look at a public health response, what I do is now I'm feeling like, if everyone has got a toddler, has that, or a grandchild, has that same response. You have that why. Why is learning. So when a toddler asks why, what they're doing is digging deeper and deeper, and that's the way they learn. I feel like as adults we've forgotten that. We've forgotten to learn that way. And so the public health approach to human trafficking, which is what we're doing here, is looking at, okay, I see you. You come to see me in the emergency department, but why is this happening? Why am I taking care of migrant workers from Sierra Leone or the Congo? Why am I taking care of refugees from Afghanistan and they're being trafficked? So what I'm doing, what I've looked at, and not just take care of that person that's in front of me, but I want to look at the public, whole populations, and think of how can I affect a change but prevent it. And that's public health. It's asking, it's that toddler glasses, it's asking the why and digging deeper so we can affect prevention change in a public arena. Does that make sense? Because I feel like when we use the jargon public health, a lot of times it's just misunderstood. But we want to move away from hearing from somebody just as an individual and looking at the whole population. And like I said, you've got a first-class program right here at UW. So this is a lot of words to say, let's put on our toddler learning glasses again and start to dig deeper to ask why. Because there are ways that we can affect change that have to do with where you're sitting in your space. What is your sphere of influence? So we haven't even talked about climate change yet. So let me just introduce a case study from here, from Bastion Island. There is a landscaping business that just in January, he was indicted on 21 felonies. And so it's not a response of him going to jail for over 20 years, but we're going to dig deeper about the why it happened. And so that's something I want to kind of share about as I was starting to understand what was happening here. I'm from the East Coast. And so when I was starting to understand what was happening here, it's not all that different because Pennsylvania, where I'm from, has a lot of different and similar ways of seeing trafficking and landscaping is one of them. So we're going to come back to the landscaping that is on Bastion Island, but I want to bring this home because I want to dig deeper with this case. So, as we're talking about climate change, and I think this is no surprise to you all, but there's 3 pathways of climate change disasters that can lead to trafficking. So I've kind of grouped them. The slow onset, like the droughts and deforestation, that takes time, but we see it. The sudden onset, like what's going on in the Philippines with the cyclones, we've got floods, hurricanes. Those are sudden and awful. And then we have a combination. We've got a combination of those 2 things. So if we think about what the pathway is, we can start thinking of things that are going on in the world right now, in your community right now, that can start to imagine some of the vulnerabilities that are happening. So we've got some experts already in the room that will talk about this a little bit later. But when I see climate disasters happening, what a climate disaster does, and again, it makes sense when we talk through it, it is a threat multiplier. So the things that are already bad in an area get worse. And so if there's a loss of life and property, that becomes infinitely worse. If we have property that's lost and you get completely wiped out by the monsoons in India, again, worse. So we think about what climate disasters do. And that is, it just multiplies and exacerbates the threats that are already there. This is a picture from the Seattle Times of some Ukrainian refugees coming here to this area for support from the Seattle area. And imagine the devastation that they've gone through. But things not only are climate, but war. So we're talking about many things that kind of exacerbate vulnerability. So what I put here is migration equals adaptation. So as we were hearing from Honorable, I want to say Belmont, I'm just going to say Belmont. As we were hearing from her, she shared about the way that the strong people across the world adapt to these types of disasters as they migrate. I can't make a living, my house is floated down the river, the coast is eroding, so I can't even fish here anymore. So I'm going to move to an area that I know I can provide a better life for my family. So this is the way that people have survived and adapted beautifully. So I think this is the bottom line. Now that your brain is kind of thinking about vulnerability, the bottom line is vulnerability is the key component that heightens the risk of trafficking. So if there's any circumstances, and we know that with labor and force, so if there's language difficulties, if you don't have housing, if there's poverty, any vulnerability, and then you throw on a climate disaster on top of it, makes you vulnerable to trafficking. So if you think about where you come from in your own communities, it's going to start to make sense, or that they're really going to suffer with that next drought, or this is really going to be a problem with that if there's a flooding. And so I think this is the key for us to remember, that anything that exacerbates vulnerability, which climate does, is going to be at risk. So let's go back to the landscaping case. So if we were to look at the why, so bad guy, has been away for 20 years, great. So that response has happened. But now let's ask why. So climate change often drives forced labor. Completely makes sense to me now that we're kind of talking about the things that make it worse. And so with this particular landscaping company, he was from South Central Mexico, the owner of the landscaping company. So he would go down and recruit people, say, I've got a better life for you. You know, it's a beautiful place. We've got a job. I'm going to provide you housing, food, all that stuff. And so he would bring some people legally and some people he would smuggle over. And he would appeal to them. But what must have been going on in their hometown that made them say, it sounds like a really good idea to join you and know that I can take care of my family back home. So again, the case itself isn't as special as us now switching our brains to think about what must be going on back in their homeland of Mexico that makes them think this is a good idea. Seattle or somewhere up north is very far from where I live, but this is a really good idea for me because I'm going to get housing, I'm going to get some money, I'm going to be able to send that home to my family, and it ended up being a nightmare for them. But I think the key to this, in my mind, is not looking at the response, which was locking them up, which was a good one, and that's, I think, in January, when he finally got sentenced this year. But the response that we as now public health experts, which we aren't, but we're going to be, is to think about what's going on and what can we do here in our community that might make a difference to prevent this from ever happening. So I want us to put on different hats to think about that. So now that you are thinking about that, I'm presuming most of you are from this area. So you start to think, okay, so what's so special about the state of Washington that makes us susceptible to trafficking? And now the things will make sense to you. Okay, when I think about, there's lots of ports. So fishing, there was a Filipino fishing boat that was stranded here, I think last year. More fishermen were stuck here, they just were abandoned in a port. We're top, Washington is the top food producing state. Bordering Canada, bordering ports, and I had no idea, but the state of Washington is the third largest refugee receiving state in the country. So now we're thinking, people love your state. They're coming here to seek refuge. They're coming here for support because they're told Washington is a good, safe place. And so what that means is you have an influx of vulnerable people coming to your state that will be doing work in these areas. And let's talk about some of those industries. So as I started to really understand some of the industry reasons, I had no idea that non-timber forest harvesting was so big in the state of Washington. So that's like harvesting berries and mushrooms and seeds and things like that. That's big here. In fact, it's so big that there was an OEC grant office for victims of crime grant that was awarded to the state of Washington to help with the support and provide language posters, provide education, like Honorable Ellen sharing about know your rights. What are your rights when you're working in these high-risk industries? What are your rights, and who do you go to when things are not going well, where you feel like they're not going well? So Washington State has some pretty significant high-risk areas. And then let's throw on some climate stressors to that. So we've already got industries in the state of Washington that are tough, right? They're already at risk. Then you throw on some global warming, things are like some drought that adds some invasive species that are now eating away those mushrooms that used to be doing really well. The cherry market and the apple market and the raspberry market, all of which I've enjoyed some of the apples here, are suffering. So those crops are really suffering. And then you think about what the poor fishermen are going through. So when the water is a little bit warmer, it's very subtle, they go to where it's cooler. So then you have less productivity close to the state, and then you have more away, so the fish are moving. And again, if you think about these climate changes, so this is a slow onset, right, that we're talking through. And then you throw that on top of the people that are doing this work are vulnerable already, that we've got this perfect storm of disaster that's happening, but all is not lost. And this is where I kind of want us to talk through. So the next few slides are going to talk about ways to think about impacting where you're from and what are some things that you can do. So there's really kind of 3 stages. There's before the disaster, there's during the disaster, and then there's after the disaster. So as an educator, as a former clinician, now I'm trying to educate, I'm trying to do the before. So I'm trying to work on inspiring you all to think about where am I working that I might be able to affect a change? What's my sphere of influence? I am not a legislator. In fact, there is someone else in Kiel that does a lot of the advocacy work and works with legislation in Washington, D.C., but that is not me. My gift, the thing that I feel like I would get very passionate about doing is trying to educate. So that I feel is everybody kind of just has to figure out where they fit. And so the before, and I'm just giving one example in each before, during, and after disaster. I'm sure there's a lot more space that as your brain is starting to think about the ways that you can affect a change. So is there a way that we can equip both governmental and non-governmental organizations to build protections against forced labor? So think of the Brothers Landscaping case. Is there a way, are there organizations out there that help with workers' rights? sharing know your rights, sharing in many different languages to reach all colors so that we can share this information and continually make sure it gets disseminated so that people actually know that this is not normal. It's not normal that he holds your money, that he pays you less than he agreed. And it's not normal that he charges you an exorbitant amount to live in a pigsty and charges you for substandard food. Like, that's not normal. But if that's all you know, then you don't know how to protect yourself. So is there a way in our organizations in the back, many are doing this already, is there a way to continue that education or take it a step further in your area of influence? So because I was in the ER and then became horrified about the people that I must have missed in 20 years, I became kind of this rabid animal talking about human trafficking anytime anyone would just sit down and listen to me. And I became like, oh God, it's not even like, let's walk the other way so that we don't have to listen to our ranting and raving. But that was my sphere of influence, was within the emergency department. And then I went beyond the emergency department to look at the hospital system. Like, what? We have 20,000 employees and we have no policy and procedure on human trafficking and how to manage patients. Okay, well, let's work on that. And that's how I met HEAL. As I reached out, I Googled, and I reached out, and I looked for an organization that helped train healthcare providers. I was like, I am way behind, but I need some help here. And so that's how I was introduced to HEAL, because that was my sphere of influence, was to start to help other healthcare providers to see what it looked like, start to get to know the resources that were in my area, and sleepy little Allentown, Pennsylvania, which isn't so sleepy anymore. And then have to change that way. So just to give you an example of how things can progress, these take time. So Todd and I were just saying that from the legislation to now, this is over 20 years. We still have an issue. We still are working at it. This is a marathon. So I want to encourage you not to be discouraged. So 5 years ago, just to give you an example, when I started jumping up and down about human trafficking and, oh gosh, just go away. It was the space of, we had one special agent from Homeland Security that was sitting at the corner of a desk at a local police department, and she was the one agent for the whole southeastern part of Pennsylvania. And so 5 years later, after working with HEAL, after starting to figure out how we could create these linkages amongst people that have the same heart that I did, we now have an anti-trafficking multidisciplinary response team with 7 special agents from Homeland Security in our space. And they run monthly multidisciplinary meetings. But again, it starts from like your sphere. So thinking about who you know and thinking about what you can do to affect that change. So Milagros from Northwest Immigration Rights Project is back there. And I just wanted to share that this is who received the grant to provide these fabulous services. So if you want to know more about that, she gave me the button. Oh my God, I mentioned you in the talk because they're doing fantastic work and we have the gift of having her here. So Milagros back left side, and we'll see her afterwards. So during climate disasters, I was reading how there were hundreds of asylum seekers that set up camp in Seattle Central District and were camping there. And so they're here now. So we've got people that have suffered just unspeakable horror. What are we doing right now during this? Some of it was climate related, some of it's war related. It doesn't matter, but if we think about the vulnerability, what are some ideas of things that we can do that can help to offset and support folks while they're here? Is there a way to create a database and try to keep track of displaced persons that are in camps? Is there a way that can establish some guidelines and safety to provide safety is that we work with our local law enforcement and think about ways that we can address gender and sexual violence that might be occurring amongst the vulnerable population. So again, if we're thinking about what we can do, where is our sphere of influence, think about some ideas here. There was, I think, Seattle, when I was reading, and someone can correct me, please feel free, that there was no more funding for temporary housing with Seattle, and so they were looking on to the state for support for these asylum seekers. So I think if we think about ways to effect a change, how we, a lot of churches are stepping up at this point to offer space for temporary housing. So again, what can we do during these disasters? And then, thank you to Honorable Velma, but let's support those policymakers. Is there a group here that is addressing climate change and then looking at ways to kind of fold that in to be protective of policies that are addressing some of these gaps? I was reading about a landmark climate law aid that is assisting tribes that are literally losing their coastline. So in the coastline of Washington, some of that coast is eroding because of climate change. And so some of this funding will go to help them move safely so that their house isn't falling into the ocean and now they have nowhere to go. So there's funding out there that from this climate law that is allowing relocation to assist so that they are less vulnerable. So again, great ideas, and the state of Washington is already doing a phenomenal job. But I think there's always room for improvement. And I think if we're constantly looking at ways, testing hypotheses, looking at ways to kind of continue, then we'll certainly create impact that way. So this is my granddaughter, Kai, and she's just learned to do that one eyebrow thing. So I wanted you to think about, please share your feedback with me if you hold your phone. Let me know how I can improve this presentation. I'm constantly learning from you all, from survivors, so please feel free to hold up your phone and let me know what I can do better in this presentation. But what I want to encourage you is to share your feedback, but also let's be talkers again. Let's kind of learn again how, like, why. Let's do that. Because if we do the why, then I think we're going to start to break down some of those things that we've forgotten about and those barriers that we never really addressed, that we've kind of lost that natural curiosity that toddlers have. And so when my daughter sent me this video, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to stop her right while she's doing the one eyebrow thing so I can share it with you all. Because I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to start thinking about, put those color glasses on, put that heart of color out there so that we can start to think about ways that not only affect climate change, but also affect the population that we want to serve. I think I have references about law. So I'm going to be working the next workshop, right after this year. I'm going to get a break. I think I probably need a little bit of time. Let's really go. You're doing okay? Good. We're back on track. Okay, so I think we'll have a 10-minute bio break. I'll let you kind of explain, but I wanted to invite you to join me in the amplify your efforts, and we'll talk about how do you take now your passion to amplify those efforts in the next workshop after this. But Maria, thank you very much.
Thank you.